In October 1962, the world faced the Caribbean crisis. In response to the Soviet missiles allocation in Cuba, the United States blocked the island of freedom. Tension among nuclear powers was growing. The Soviet strategic bombers were relocated to the borders, closer to the targets in Europe and America. Exhausting combat watch began. Alert level was maximum. Nuclear bombs were suspended in Bombay. Crew commanders received sealed envelopes with codes to charges and route maps with exact targets for each aircraft. The same was happening overseas. All involved in those days experienced enormous tension. Even incomplete knowledge of the nuclear weapons capabilities drew an astonishing picture of the aftermath. The world was on the verge of the Third World War. The first Soviet ground nuclear charge was tested in 1949. Improvements of the air bomb continued until 1951. On October 18, the first Soviet nuclear air bomb was dropped at Semipalatinsk. At a special airdrome, the fully charged A-bomb is being loaded on the Tu-4 bomber. The bomb is suspended. The crew is ready for takeoff. The A-bomb carrying aircraft starts off on a combat mission. The aircraft approaches the target at an altitude of 8,000 meters. The bomb is dropped. Explosion. It was filmed from an altitude of 8,000 meters by a camera installed on the aircraft. However, Tu-4 did not become A-bomb mass carrier. Only 18 machines out of 800 produced were refurbished. Tu-4 had a range of only 5,100 kilometers, enough to reach Europe and the American bases in the Middle East and Japan. It could not reach the United States itself. From those bases, the enemy could reach practically any point of the Soviet Union. In 1948, the B-36 strategic bomber was made in the United States, representing even a greater threat. The Americans kept on demonstrating capabilities of their strategic aviation. In March 1949, the B-50 bomber performed a non-stop flight around the world. Tu-4, which fulfilled its task at the initial point of confrontation, required urgent replacement. In the end of the 40s, all Soviet directive documents contained the term range as priority. Andrei Tupolev had to go through all those problems. On his way toward Tu-16, his team built an experimental 82 aircraft to master the swept wing. Several other projects were calculated. The last in the row, Aircraft 88, became the Tu-16 prototype. Sergei Ilyushin dealt with high-speed bombers. He once created a successful frontline Il-28 bomber. Therefore, for a new long-range bomber, the military command turned to him. Ilyushin did not take risks and developed the first variant, just like Il-28, with a straight wing. The aircraft was called Il-46. The straight-wing Il-46 performed its first flight in March 1952. 2 months thereafter, the swept-wing Tu-16 also took off. Ilyushin expedited works on the swept-wing Il-46, but time was lost. Tupolev already demonstrated characteristics that fascinated the customer. Proper engine selection played an important role in this process. Frankly, it is more difficult to create an engine than an aircraft. Normally, engine requires longer adjustment. The aircraft designer who puts the stake on the engine, which is at its last stage of adjustment, normally wins. Tupolev made a good guess with the engine for his aircraft. By February 1951, it became clear that Mikulin's AM-3 engine will be ready with a thrust higher than the initially planned. Such engine provided Tu-16 with a speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour with full bomb low. In 1954, bombers were passed to the long-range aviation units. Soon, there appeared Tu-16A, the nuclear weapons carrier. Special attention was devoted to the layout and crew protection from thermal and radioactive emissions. The aircraft surface was covered with a special white thermal-resistant paint. Cabin glazing had special shutters. Still, after a complex nuclear impact, the lower light alloy plating could be pierced with a finger like cardboard. Tu-16A took part in 80% of all nuclear tests in the USSR. The Soviet Air Force obtained powerful means of destruction. The tasks which used to require numerous air units now could be performed by one crew. The power of just one nuclear bomb exceeds capacity of all 32 million bombs expended in the Great Patriotic War. The nuclear weapons jet carrier seemed to be ready, but the range still did not allow to reach America. The ever-growing military confrontation urged both the USSR and the USA to create a high-speed intercontinental aircraft. Overseas, this task was undertaken by several companies at once. Of all the projects, the Americans selected the B-52 Stratofortress of the Boeing Company. It had a wide-span swept wing. 8 engines provided the bomber with a speed of 950 kilometers per hour and a range of 12,000 kilometers. But B-52 did not reach such flight characteristics at once. The technical task of such an aircraft development is one of the most complicated. The bomber's prototype performed its first flight in April 1952, and only 3 years later, after numerous adjustments, this aircraft was passed on service for the U.S. Strategic Aviation Command. Since then, the Stratofortress has been on service, obtaining new capabilities from one modernization to another. Stalin decided to have a security in case Mosyshev fails and provided Tupolev with funds to build his aircraft. Moreover, with the turboprop engines, Tupolev guaranteed a range of 13,000 kilometers. Competition with both the Americans and each other was useful. Since the 30s, Andrei Tupolev was famous for organizing cooperation. This time again, he used his connections and authority in realization of his project and managed to retain a lot of contractors. In November 1952, 2 months prior to the Mosyshev's aircraft, the Tupolev's Tu-95 took off. But not everything went smooth. During one of the test flights, the first Tu-95 crashed. The lead went back to Mosyshev, who offered a number of measures to reach the required range. During works on the second M4 prototype, as the aircraft was called, a struggle against excessive weight was launched. A bonus was announced for each kilo of reasonable reduction. The landing gear was equipped with extension mechanisms, significantly reducing the takeoff run. The aircraft passed tests within just 4 months. It reached a speed of 950 kilometers per hour and a range of 9,500 kilometers. This was less than the promised, but allowed to cross the ocean. For example, there are less than 8,000 kilometers from Moscow to Washington, D.C. The bomber was urgently commissioned, and on May 1, 1954, it flew over the Red Square. The same year, aircraft started to join air units. The new bomber produced enormous impression on pilots. Less than 10 years passed after the war. Pilots still remembered the old airplanes. Po-2 and Lee-2 were still everywhere. And now this 180-ton beauty with a 50-meter wingspan capable of reaching the other continent. However, in result of continuous improvements, the two aircraft were now differing a lot from each other. This made the life of technicians and pilots more difficult. But nobody worried about that when the destiny of the country was at stake. M4 became the first in the world strategic jet bomber put on service. What about Tu-95? Works relating to adjustment of the aircraft and its engines required significantly more time. The second copy entered tests in February 1955. Capacity of its turboprop engines amounted to 12,000 horsepower. At tests, Tu-95 reached a range of 14,000 kilometers and was commissioned before the tests ended. It outlived its mischievous competitor, and all that time its avionics, armament, and combat potential was continuously improving. There was another reason. Supersonic interceptors and improved air defense left poor chances for the large aircraft to reach the target. With missiles, they could even not enter the air defense area, launching them from afar. But how to put missiles on a bomber? The first cruise missiles were rather bulky. Bombers had a narrow fuselage. In order to lower the drag, designers were reducing the cross-section at maximum. So missiles could be suspended only outside in a semi-recessed position under the fuselage or put on pylons under the wing. But this created additional drag. However, the total efficiency of such a system was higher than that of an ordinary bomber. Practically all commissioned long-range strategic bombers were tested as carriers of the cruise missile. The Tu-16 long-range bomber also became a missile carrier. In 1954, it was tested with a Comet, the first anti-ship cruise missile. The KH-20 missile was made specifically for strategic bombers. Tu-95 served this task most of all, identified in this variant as Tu-95K. Departing from the carrier, KH-20 could climb at an altitude of 15,000 meters and could fly for 500 kilometers at Mach 2. A similar system was made in the USA. The most successful was the Hound Dog missile installed on B-52. The key to success was in the recently appeared novelty, the variable swept wing. Remember how many problems the swept wing brought to the Tu-22 pilots at landing. Now the aircraft could take off and land with a straight wing, while to increase the speed, it could vary the sweep. In spite of some technical complexity of such a wing, it was optimizing flight characteristics depending on their condition. The variable swept wing allows to use better aerodynamic characteristics at various flight regimes. Takeoff and landing are performed at 20 degrees. The subsonic flight is performed at 30 degrees. The supersonic flight is at 60 degrees. Tu-22M was used in Afghanistan. Taking off from the Soviet territory, they bombed the Mujahid positions. It was then became clear that the bomber's capabilities were excessive for local tasks. The bomber was created for much more, for destruction of entire cities. As to the supersonic strategic aircraft, attempts to create it on both sides of the front never stopped. The United States were developing its B-1, the multi-mode bomber. Same works also started in the Soviet Union in 1967. Tu-160 was designed as a multi-mode strategic missile carrier. For the first time, such a heavy aircraft was equipped with a variable swept wing. With the wing sweep increase, there is a fence appearing from the first section flaps in the wing root, which serves for the wing's better lift-to-drag ratio in all flight regimes. According to NATO classification, Tu-160 was called the Black Jack. The Soviet pilots called it the White Swan. It had a wingspan of 55 meters and a takeoff weight of 275 tons, of which 170 tons represented fuel. Its range was 13,000 kilometers. It was armed with 12 Kh-55 missiles. Previously, missiles were simply suspended under the aircraft. Now they were put in a revolver launching unit. Cruise missiles were now more advanced. Though they fly at a subsonic speed, they do it at an extreme low altitude following the terrain. This makes them practically invulnerable. Their range has increased to 3,000 kilometers, like of a modern fighter. Production of 100 new missile carriers started in the Soviet Union, but in mid-80s funding was reduced and with the country's collapse ended completely. Only 30 machines were built. Prior to Tu-160, the strategic niche was occupied by Tu-95. Its modernization was continuous, but it got a second wind in the new Tu-95MS modification. It only looks like its predecessor, but its capabilities have significantly increased. New electronic equipment on board computers, powerful jamming support capable of distracting the most wise enemy's guidance system. The strategic bomber carries up to 16 Kh-55 cruise missiles. But with all the global technologies, for the first time since Tu-4, this machine was equipped with a toilet room. On all prior aircraft, with a range of up to 10 hours of flight, such a trifle was never given a thought. In the end of the 80s, the process of strategic weapons mutual reduction was started. Practically all Missishev bombers, together with Tu-16, Tu-22, and early Tu-95 modifications, got under the ban. According to the agreement, Tu-95MS can carry no more than 6 cruise missiles. After the Soviet Union's collapse, a lot of bombers remained in the Ukraine and Belarusia. Under new conditions, these countries did not need any strategic aviation. Part of the bombers were passed over to Russia, the other part was scrapped. 100 B-1 strategic bombers were issued in the United States by that time. In the new geopolitical conditions, the Americans also started to count whether they needed such an expensive aircraft in such an amount. However, this did not stop them from making a new B-2 stealth bomber, the last tribute to the Cold War. Currently, Russia employs Tu-22M3 long-range bombers, Tu-95MS and Tu-160 strategic systems, as well as Il-78 air tankers. Tu-160 is by right the flagship of the Russian strategic aviation. Each is given its own name. One of the aircraft is called the Ilya Muromets, in honor of the first Russian bomber made almost 100 years ago. The history of the long-range aviation proves that together with the strategic missile forces and the nuclear submarine fleet, it makes an integral part of the country's defense system. Its potential is far from being exhausted. With the use of the high-precision weapons and the most advanced avionics, aircraft can fight not only with strength, but with skill. There has been not a single spot on the planet which they could not reach.